I want to thank you all for coming out today on this finally a beautiful Saturday morning. Let's hope it's the first of many beautiful days to come. I'm Lynn Hansel. I'm a co-chair of the Energy Committee, and this is Susan O'Connor, who's our other co-chair, and Annie Chappelle and also Judy Wagner, who are members of the Energy Committee, are here today to talk with you about this great opportunity we have in our town for electricity aggregation. It's not something I knew a lot about until Susan became really interested in it through going to meetings at FERCOG and brought it back to the Energy Committee, and it's really through Susan and I'd say her work on this that we're able to do this for our town of Northfield. We have a warrant at town meeting which, if it passes, would authorize our select board to consider joining with these other towns in our electricity aggregation. We have a presentation for you today to explain what this all is and what it would mean for our town. And we are going to take turns in presenting the slide presentation we have, and I'm going to kick it off with Susan, who's going to be our first presenter today. Thanks.
Well, this feels very formal to be up here with a podium and a microphone, so for our very small group, but I'm just going to dig in here, and I want to say this is an informal session, so if you have questions, please ask them as they occur to you. You don't have to wait till the end. And the other night we did this, and we had a lot of questions throughout the presentation. So it really helps us to understand what kind of questions people have and how we can tighten up how we explain this so that we're covering all the things that might be in your mind. So, Okay, Lynn, I'm just going to ask you to advance it. Thank you. And this is our Energy Committee. We have two members that aren't here today, Steve Roberto and Andrew Vernon, and many of you may know those two committee members. Okay, and we have as an Energy Committee, a mission statement that basically says our job is to stabilize energy costs, lower towns' carbon emissions, reduce our dependence on non-renewables, and we're really working to promote this by energy conservation. And for anyone who has heard us talk in the last 6 months, you may know that we're eagerly awaiting word on a Green Communities grant that is going to help us to make our schools more energy efficient, a desperately needed task. So we should know about that in about a couple of months, and just knock on wood for us, everybody. We're a lot of work went into it, and we're really hoping that that can make a big difference in our town. So, what is electricity aggregation? It's basically the bulk purchase of electricity for a city or town. Now, what we're particularly excited about is the work of the Energy Committee in the past has been particularly around town buildings. We've done work here in the library, a lot of work in Town Hall, the pellet boiler at Town Hall. But this is our first chance, really, to do something that's going to help with our residential use and make that greener. And so we're really excited about that. Electricity aggregation was made possible with the passage of the 1997 Electric Restructuring Act. We became one of the first states in the country to enable electrical aggregation. Probably California is slightly ahead of us in this work right now, but Massachusetts has been one of the leaders. So right now what happens is aggregators purchase electricity wholesale and can sell it to communities like Northfield. I want to just ask you right now, because we're thinking that we want a greener source of electricity, I want to ask you just right now what your knowledge is of where our electricity comes from. What is the primary source of our electricity? And then the answer's on the next slide, but I'm just, because I had no idea. And yeah, when I found out, it surprised me, so I'm just quizzing you now. Any idea?
There's somewhere in Canada along whatever that big river is. I'm not sure.
Hydroelectric?
Yeah.
Okay, hydroelectric is one source. Yep. What might be our other sources? Any idea?
You see that nice big Northeast Utilities, Northfield Mountain site down by the Connecticut River.
Okay,
Right
okay.
nearby.
I meant the fuel source, but
Oh,
let's
okay.
go right to the next page and take a look at this. By a lot, Massachusetts electricity is coming from natural gas.
Oh,
And the next highest source of our electricity is nuclear. Then there's also hydroelectric, there's oil-fired. If you look at the bottom, one of the smaller amounts is from renewables, renewable sources. And that is solar, wind, and also hydroelectric. But non-hydroelectric renewables is really as small as the oil amount. So we're very interested in making sure that we can try to move toward bulk purchase of electricity that has a better spread of these kinds of sources. Next slide. So one thing that you can remember is not all aggregations are created equal. And I'm going to be getting into a little bit of technical information here, but I think it's really important. There is something called Class 1 aggregation, and this is where we're drawing from wind, solar, and digester gas that were created after 1997 and feed directly into the New England grid. So we're saying newer sources of renewables. Hi, good to see you. Then there is Class 2, and this is energy that comes from projects that were in commercial operation before 1998. So while municipal aggregation has been possible since 1997, there has been since 2014 a specific focus on green municipal aggregation. This is a model where the option is for more than 5% or more of the Class 1 resources. So Class 1, wind, solar, digester gas, after 1997. So a new and efficient renewable energy.
Can I ask you what digester gas is?
Yes, digester gas, Northfield has recently purchased digester gas for 15% of the use of its electricity in its town buildings. And there are 2 digester gas projects here in Western Mass. They're located on farms where they're using cow manure mixed with food waste, and it swirls around and creates methane. And it's sort of like if you have solar, anybody here have solar panels? So it feeds into the grid, and it's not like, oh, we're going to get a separate bill for our digester gas, but the electricity company knows that 15% of our town electricity is being covered with this digester gas. So what do we call it? Cow power, thank you. So it's cow power, and we're involved in that as well. We may have a field trip when the local farm is really up and going, and I realized the other night I need to call about that. So we might publicize that in case anybody would like to take a trip. I can't wait myself, so. So anyway, green municipal aggregation has been growing. It's really where there's a commitment to at least 5% more Class 1 energy than is required. So what is required right now? The way the law reads is that every year Eversource, our supplier, has to increase its use of green sources by 1%, and we're right now at 13%. And so we're saying that green aggregation is where you go at least 5% beyond that requirement. And this green aggregation's been adopted by a number of towns: Arlington, Brookline, Dedham, Somerville, Sudbury, and Winchester. Okay, so why should we be choosing green municipal aggregation? Let's take a look at the reasons. There are environmental reasons. It can help us to meet the Mass Global Warming Solutions Act, which is saying that we want to have an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. And some of you may have read that there's a growing movement to move toward 100% reduction of emissions by 2050. It's a very ambitious goal. Also, it's to provide us with a broader choice of green electricity and to displace fossil fuel generation, which in turn reduces carbon emissions, which is what is causing global warming. Then there are some economic reasons. We really want to become part of building the capacity in New England for renewable energy development. And this is one way of, very direct way of choosing that. We want to create green jobs here in New England and gain more local control of purchasing, and then it can also lead to better pricing through economies of scale. And people often ask us, well, is this going to mean a lower electricity bill? We can't promise that, but it's a goal for us to come in at or below the Eversource pricing as we move toward electric aggregation. And next slide. So I think there's also this important social justice reason. It can help reduce the siting of large-scale polluting facilities in disadvantaged communities. Sometimes these polluting facilities are causing serious health problems due to air quality and water quality issues. And we know, for example, that asthma rates in Springfield, where there is some siting of big facilities, is higher than it is here. And people wouldn't be surprised about that. In summary, really, I like the quote from this man, Tommy Vitolo, who's a citizen in Brookline, and he just says, although the state requires that 12%, it's now 13%, of all electricity comes from new renewable sources, increasing 1% every year, at that rate, the state will not be able to meet its own goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions of 80% by the year 2050. So we want to be helping to meet that goal. We think it's a very, very important goal, and there just doesn't seem to be the public will right now, and this is one way of getting a little bit more control of that. So I'm going to turn now over to Annie.
Okay, so this slide shows you, oh, if you go back to the graph.
Sorry.
That's okay. This slide is representing rates over time, and the percentage of renewables is the graph portion on the right. So we're going from June 2006, and these are half years, fiscal years represented here, where the rate from Eversource was roughly 7 cents a kilowatt hour, and not much in the way of renewables. Now their portfolio has grown to about the 13% that you see at the far right, and the rate has gone up to above 15 cents a kilowatt hour by the end of June 2018. When you see a spike on the graph, the blue bars represent what may be variations in weather anomalies. We might have had a terrible winter between June and June of 2015 that represents that spike in electric use. And it might also be the fluctuation of natural gas prices, since we're heavily weighted in the natural gas usage with Eversource. So that's why you're seeing spikes there. And we think that some renewable sources may help stabilize some of those fluctuations. So these are some of the towns, or these are the towns involved now with green municipal aggregation. And it's a growing trend. I think everybody feels that it's a win-win. And so moving toward that, it might get us to that statewide goal of 100% or 80% just by buying, opting in, staying in with this program faster than the 1% a year that PhD was quoted saying. This is the map that shows you sort of the variation of how towns have chosen. You can see that the Cape all kind of opted in one clump. That might have been one aggregator for all of those towns. They're at the 1% or greater default class. The 5% is the dark green, and that's a handful of towns, and that's where we hope to land with that. And so by voting yes at town meeting, we're just authorizing the select board to help us get into an agreement with the chosen aggregator, which is one of several that could be interviewed. And then the select board member, Julia Blythe, along with Susan, who is our representative from the Energy Committee, who's on that group of aggregators with these other towns, will choose an aggregator, and then we'll proceed with that. These are the towns that we would be joining with: Buckland, Charlemont, Coleraine, Conway, Deerfield, Gill, New Salem, Shelburne, Shutesbury, Warwick, and Leverett for a contract. And the next steps into the green woods.
Some of the steps for securing the aggregation have already been completed. So we joined Franklin County Regional Electricity Aggregation. There was a committee that included Julia Blythe and Susan O'Connor, who met with for the FERCOG towns to consider whether or not to move ahead, and that's what's happening. We are, where it says provide information sessions, that's what we're doing right now. And we haven't yet voted at town meeting, but that's coming up very soon. And then interviewing aggregators and aggregator candidates and hire is in process as well. We just have a few more steps to go with planning and creating a contract. We need to make sure that the select board is authorized to do those steps, as that's what the town warrant is about. Go ahead. So these are the frequently asked questions. We'll try to hit most of the questions you may have on your mind, but feel free to interrupt or ask a question if it comes up. How does aggregation impact my electricity bill? Go ahead, yeah. So you're still going to receive a bill from Eversource, and you're still going to pay Eversource. There's no change to your meter, and all service and billing questions still go to Eversource. What about the cost? Lower cost, while possible, we can't guarantee that there will be lower cost because there is no way to really predict future rates. But the aggregators that we would contract with watch the market 24/7, and they get a heads up and they jump in at just the right time to do their very best to provide us with the lowest possible rates. Several towns with green municipal aggregation have lower rates than the basic service from Eversource. And participants in aggregation will see no change in their utility bill other than a change in price on energy supply. Go ahead, Susan. So this is an example of some of the other towns that are currently involved with green municipal aggregation. And you'll notice that towns with GMA are paying less than their basic service. So although this is not a guarantee, it'll be more likely as more green energy is added. So, increased demand, for instance, will create more green sources, which will then drop our rates. The default green, which is, so in this table you have the town and then the contract length, but then default green is 5%, and that is what these towns have mostly opted for, and that's where you can see that their rates are lower than the Eversource rates during the same period of time. Opting up to 100%, Dedham was actually able to have lower rates than the basic Eversource rate, and the other towns are just marginally higher. So even opting up to 100% renewable wouldn't it would create a higher bill, but it's marginal. It's very marginal. I think that's all for that slide. If we want to move on. What if I have solar panel system? Will my net metering rate stay the same? That was the biggest question I had, because my family has a pretty large array on our roof, and I was just wondering how this might affect us. There's no difference in how we would currently interface with Eversource. Net metering will still be based on Eversource's basic service rate. So some people might wonder, can I opt out? Yes. If we end up in this aggregation agreement, everyone who's currently on Eversource will receive a letter explaining to them that they could opt out if they wish, and that would just mean, you would need to fill out that paperwork and send that in, and that's at the beginning. And then even after that, you can still opt out at any time if you wish. Of the towns that currently do green municipal aggregation, only about 3 to 7% of the people in those towns have chosen to opt out. It's very rare, because I suppose everyone sort of understands the benefits of it and receives the benefits of it. So it's been quite rare that people do opt out, but it's an option.
So do you have to have a minimum percentage of people doing this, or does it matter?
I'm not sure of, I think that because there's so many towns that are joining the aggregation, that it still is economically viable for the aggregator to provide those sources of energy for our town. And especially with an opt-out rate as low as 3 to 7%, it doesn't really affect it very much. What if I'm interested in supporting even more than 5% green power supply? That sort of goes back to that chart with the green stripes that I showed a minute ago. Some communities have negotiated an aggregation contract that includes an opt-up for individual accounts. That is something I believe that we would want to pursue. In those cases, those people can purchase additional green power supply just at a slightly higher rate, usually less than $5 a month. You'd be able to opt up to even greater than 5%. And in some cases, customers could opt up to 100% renewables and still pay less than the basic service from Eversource, like that on that chart with Dedham. Okay. So there's a lot of effort in making sure that a competent supplier will be selected. Only those licensed by the Commonwealth will be able to apply and have applied. There's a request for proposal from a template that's used by Eastern Mass. So we've chosen a proposal, the request for proposals from a successful example in southeastern Massachusetts. For COG, which is Franklin Regional County of Governments, in case anyone, I didn't know what FRCOG was for a while, and I would nod my head, and then finally I learned it's a government agency that pulls in Franklin County towns into one particular organization. They have procurement specialists who are involved in helping us make sure that we contract with someone who's reputable and who is giving us a good deal. The committee on which Susan O'Connor and Julia Blythe are members will review proposals, interview candidates, and get references. And, you know, that's sort of the end of the formal portion of the slide presentation. We're ready for other questions or comments that you might have. Yes?
Are there several aggregator groups that are applying?
Yes. That are, Susan, do you want to answer that, or?
Yeah.
I think I will turn it over to Susan because she's the one who's been attending the meetings and may have a bit more expertise than me.
Thanks, and that's a good question. Actually, we sent the RFP out, even though we haven't been all the way through the town meeting process. There are 3 aggregators in Massachusetts, and only 1 applied. But the one that applied is the one that is doing almost all the work in Western Mass, and including Berkshire County. They have 18 towns in Berkshire County, and I think they already have 7 towns in Hampden, Hampshire County, and now this would add 13 towns for Franklin County. One interesting possibility we could be pursuing over time is the idea of linking up in our aggregation with those Berkshire County towns, which would add, there is an economy of scale to this, all of this. And so if we could link with a larger aggregation, it would be good, because our 13 towns are actually probably end up being less than actually the town of Greenfield, which has been in this for a very long time. So we're very small towns. So becoming larger would be a good thing. We also think there are towns in Franklin County that will jump in once they see it to be successful. So there are some towns that just haven't stepped in yet.
Is Greenfield doing their own thing?
Yes, they are, and they've been at it. I'm not going to remember. I think they've been doing it for about 5 years now, and they're with a company called Peregrine. I think what's different about Greenfield is that they're big enough that they've actually hired an energy staff person who is able to do all of the work for them. The advantage for us is that because we're going through the FERCOG and going with this particular aggregator, this aggregator's used to working with small towns and will do all of the work. There's a process once we sign a contract with them that they have to go through. They have to create a plan that has to get approved by the Department of Public Utilities. And it's complicated, and some towns like Leverett that tried to go do this by themselves spent a year. Their committee, just want to tell the committee, saving you a lot of effort, because Leverett spent a year with their committee trying to sort this out and working directly with a lawyer, and they found it very difficult. But in this case, our aggregator will do that whole process, and it even takes them, with all their experience, about 8 months to get this plan through the DPU. So let's say we contract with them, our town passes the town warrant article, and then they start putting their plan together, working with us to make sure that our contract's kind of what we want it to be. And it's still going to take well into the winter or next spring before this happens, just to give you a timeline. Other questions?
I think what would be a selling point for me, because every time I inquire about solar, they ask my usage, and it's always below the threshold. But this is something that I think citizens can buy into easily. And if we use the digester gas with all the farms in the area, do they pull in from farms up here to supply the digester, or would that maybe create more opportunity for farmers to get their manure products a market and help the farmers?
Well, I love your thinking, and I can't answer that question. I know that the 2 current farms are separate, and they're probably they're probably a formal company. I don't think that they bring in manure from other farms, but boy, wouldn't that be great?
I do know, though, just to add to that, that lots of local restaurants and food producers add their food potential waste to the digesters, just for added bulk and material. There was a really nice article just a week or two ago in the Greenfield Recorder that you could look up. It shows sort of the cradle to grave operation. It's the Barway Farm in Deerfield that they profile.
Oh, okay.
And it's pretty fascinating and just all around good. It lowers the methane gas is a terrible greenhouse gas, as you know. And so that's a good question. But I think
It's excellent.
Bring in food waste instead of other things. And just to clarify, it sounded sort of like you were saying that we choose to opt in if we go with an aggregator and the vote is yes, and this all happens. The way it works, I think, is that we're all, as resident purchasers of electric, we're all part of the new green energy aggregator unless you opt out and decide to stay with Eversource. So you're automatically in, you don't have to make that choice. And then it just reflects that in the bill from Eversource.
Yeah, so the way it would go is they get the plan passed by the DPU, and then they bid for us. The town signs a contract. And then 30 days from the time that the aggregation starts, you would get a letter, and I'm just going to pass around a sample letter so you can see what it looks like. And it includes a response form that you can send in if you want to opt out. So the beauty of this is it's choice for everybody. It's a great thing. It's a win-win. Many of us are going to want to opt in. Few people might want to opt out, but that's their individual choice. So no one is being forced into something they're not interested in. And if you could just pass those around. I also just want to put in a pitch for the opt-up strategy. The people on the committee, the towns on the committee are all pretty clear that we would like to have an opt-up strategy. We were surprised the other day to learn that not that many people tend to opt up. Again, maybe because it takes an action. Just like opting out means you have to sign a form and send it in. Oh my gosh, it takes 5 minutes. But opting up is going to require the same thing, and so people aren't opting up. And so I'm really just trying to encourage people to think and be prepared to become part of an opt-up strategy, because as Lynn said, it's estimated to cost about $5 more a month, which is $60 a year. And for me, that feels like a better investment than some of my contributions, say, to climate change groups. It feels very direct. It feels that I'm taking my personal responsibility for that, and I'm in a way voting that I want greener electricity, which in my mind, and I haven't heard an economist talk about this, but in my mind, it's going to put some pressure on Eversource to increase their renewable sources, because they're going to start seeing towns buying bulk electricity somewhere else, and they're going to start saying, gosh, we need to do more to be responsive to this movement in our region. So I've realized that I would really love to hear an energy economist or a legal person talk about the long-term impact of this movement. So I asked the other night when we were interviewing an aggregator, and he said it would take all day to explain that. So have to go for an all-day seminar, I guess. So any other questions? Now, I want to ask, is anybody here already buying from another bulk supplier like Nextam or Viridian? Okay, just in case you know somebody that is, I want to say a word about that, and that if you are buying from another bulk supplier like Viridian, you need to check into what your contract is. And usually it's hard to get out of the contract without a penalty. I think the penalty for Veridian, Annie checked into it, $50 to get out of that contract. But you would not get a letter inviting you to participate in the aggregation if you're already with another bulk supplier. They have those lists, and they don't invite someone to participate if they're already with someone else. But I'm saying because people who, if your neighbors are and they ask about it, just say they should check their contract, and they can always opt in to the aggregation once their contract runs out, or they could choose to pay the penalty and get out of their contract. So, yes.
This is a little bit distant, I think. We just moved here, so I'm trying to figure out how this compares to where I was before. The power grid and the lines and the maintenance of that and the actual delivery still comes from Eversource?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Yes.
Supply from another, okay.
Right.
That's great, thank you.
Which is why the demand side of your bill never changes, because
Right.
they're still covering all of that.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, do you think this will pass at town meeting, and what would the, because what would the opposition be?
Yeah, no, we're quite hopeful. I want to say, first of all, that in 2011, the Hampshire County of Government asked us to become part of an aggregation, and we voted. Again, the permission is really to have the select board pursue it, but it didn't work out, and it fell apart. And so some towns are saying, well, our town already voted. But our select board said, it's been 7 years. We feel that people need another chance to hear about it, to weigh in on it. We would just feel more comfortable to have a new vote. But because we've already voted, and because since then this town has faced the prospect of the pipeline and the compressor station, we're pretty hopeful. But you know, town meeting can be kind of a fluky thing. So we're just encouraging you to read up and be ready to jump up there if you know, it gets started on a negative track. That would be very helpful. So. Yeah, there are flyers in the back with the basic information on it. So take one for yourself and maybe one or two for your neighbors, and help us spread the word, because we thought we might have more people. But this is a great start, and we just think if everybody talks it up, we'll be in good shape by town meeting. So.
Can I just add, I think once people learn about it, I can't imagine the downside. I think that people who would maybe oppose it at town meeting would not fully understand it. And so that's why taking the flyers and talking it up, but a strong yes vote would give a good message to the select board that there's a lot of support for it in town, and I think that would be helpful as well.
That's perfect, Lynn, thank you.
Have towns like Springfield and Worcester gone for you?
Worcester has, let me just, West Springfield has, Springfield has not. Holyoke has their own system, but if you wanted to know any more about the towns that have gone, this is the full list. And it explains what they've gone for, what their population is, but it's whatever we said before, 127 towns, or it's a lot. It's a movement. So we have the full list.
Is Montague doing anything?
No, and that's really interesting because I know people from there, but Wendell is far into it. They're actually moving to 100% renewable this year, they hope. I talked to their town manager the other day. They're ahead of us. When we want to know what another town our size is doing, often we'll call their energy committee. They're really doing some pretty amazing things. But it just makes me want to reach out to people I know in Montague and see what the deal is. So they're not in this list. Well, I think that's it.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for coming and for helping us spread the word. And, just, most of you know somebody on the committee, so if you have questions you didn't think of today, just nab us in the future and we'll be happy to answer questions because it helps us to get more informed ourselves. We're, just one step ahead of the average person here on this, and it's been a great learning process for us.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And please be sure to grab some food on the way out.
The muffins are delicious.